everyone. My name is Yatin Wadhwa, host of Cyber from Frontlines. This is episode 5, and today we are going to talk about a lot about intrusion analysis and a lot about DFIR and how what are the best practices for doing intrusion analysis. And uh, I would like to welcome Yatin Wadhwa to this episode. Welcome, Yatin. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you, Ankur, Arun, for inviting me over to this podcast. I'm very excited about it.
Great. I'm excited as well. So just to give some background to the listeners, I came across, I usually go to the DFIR reports, and I came across a report that was written and produced by Yatin for DFIR, and I loved it. The level of information that was provided, the level of analysis that was provided was really very good, and I thought it would be good to have an episode on intrusion analysis itself and how we should look at an intrusion and how we should start working on it. So thank you so much for being here with us. So to get started, let's start. Tell us something about yourself and how you got into cyber.
Sure, Arun. So, hi everyone. My name is Yatin. So, I started my journey in the security industry as a SOC analyst. So I started working for a services security provider, and I started as a SOC analyst, tier one, then tier two. Then I later transitioned into the threat hunting team where I was working for threat hunter for very different clients. And during that journey, I came across the DFI report. As you mentioned, that you also go through a lot of our DFI reports. Similarly, I was also going through a lot of their DFI reports where, because at that point of time, the DFI report used to be one of those resources where you can actually get a holistic overview of how the intrusion works from 0 to 100 and get a better idea of what's happening. Like, because if you're working in a SOC or in these kind of environments, you get to see certain alerts at the different stages of an attack, but you don't get to see the entire picture. So when I started reading those reports, it gave me a bigger picture, like what was happening, and it got me really interested into intrusion analysis, as you mentioned, and the overall the art of analyzing, reporting, and that got me excited. And then later, after then, I moved to Microsoft, where I was also working as a security analyst in one of the internal SOCs as well.
Awesome. That's really good to know. And it's really good to know that you also do threat hunting because that is one of my main focus areas, threat hunting. And that's why, like you mentioned, right, I also looked at DFIR from that perspective because in a threat hunting role, you need to understand the TTPs. I'm not looking for IOCs, IP addresses, and
Yeah.
just I want to look at the behaviors and DFR, and especially like you mentioned, from zero to A to Z, everything in terms of the TTPs is provided there. So that's really good. Uh, just following up on that, so I'm sure most of the listeners may not be aware of DFIR. So I think it would be nice to uh, put some spin on that as well. What is DFIR? How did you get involved, and how can anyone get involved with that?
Sure. So a DFI report is an organization or a group of people who create threat intel reports. So we primarily cover ransomware attacks and the associated malware, which are used for getting the initial access into the environments. So that's the primary focus area in terms of the threat intel reports. Along with that, they also provide threat intel feeds, which any organization or an individual can subscribe to. And then we also recently started a mentoring program for individuals who want to get into the cybersecurity industry or want to explore different areas. We have professionals from different industries who have a lot of experience in this particular security industry who can help you, mentor you, and guide you as to where you can get better and how you go into this. And in terms of how I got into DFI report, so as I mentioned, I had started following DFI report, how they were going to the report. So One day I saw they had posted on Twitter, like, we are looking for contributors or volunteers who are willing to help us with creating the reports.
Mhm.
So I was working as a SOC analyst, so I just went ahead and then applied for it, like whatever was asked, not thinking that I would get through, or because it's something I just wanted to give it a try, I was learning so much, so I thought I may just apply and see what happens there. Then I went through the process, then I was selected, and it's been almost 3 years I have been volunteering for DFI Report, and I've learned so much. I have contributed with a lot of different individuals across the world, and I've got to learn so much from them, and it has been great experience.
That's
And in terms of how people want to join, so it depends upon the requirements. So, for example, as I mentioned, they had posted on Twitter, like, we are looking for contributors. Are you willing to help us? So I would say keep an eye out on those kind of posts. So on Twitter or LinkedIn, and if the opportunity arises, please go ahead, and I can promise you'll get to learn a lot as I did, and it's been an enriching experience for me.
amazing. If you get to work with folks from around the globe, that itself is an enriching experience, to say the least. So really good, good. I also know. I'm not sure if you know Maxine. He's also a contributor for DFIR. I think he's based out of Europe. So yeah, I was having a chat with him one day and just trying to see if but he was at that time busy as well. But it's good because in a sense you get to work with so many people from all around the world and gives you a different perspective. Everybody has his or her own perspective, and it's good, really good.
And definitely people have their different focus areas, strong areas in terms of knowledge, and you get to learn from them. So, for example, if I was working in security analysis or threat hunting, someone may be experienced in reverse engineering or malware analysis. So you get to learn a little bit
Right.
from everyone, and then you can create such these extensive reports which can be used for different people and they can consume it. And yeah, it's a great experience. Yes.
Awesome. Good to know. So I'm going to move towards understanding how you do intrusion analysis, what practices you follow, and what would you suggest folks who are new to intrusion in this field who want to go into this side, cyber defense, SOC, threat hunting, intrusion analysis. What is the process they should follow?
So for someone who is starting to get into SOC, like, I would say start reading reports which are publicly available. You get to get a better understanding of what's happening. TTPs, because there's a lot of focus on the MITRE attacks and techniques, and the more you learn, the more you read, you'll get better at it. And from a personal experience, yes, it can be tough in the beginning when you're reading such reports. It can be too much information to consume, but the more you read, the more you get comfortable with it, the more you will be able to explore. So that's my one advice to someone. I would always advise that to someone who is starting, who wants to get this in field, because this is such a fast growing field. Because even if I'm reading something today, there's a good chance after a week something new has come up. So I can understand it becomes tough to be in touch with everything with what's happening, but we can try to read as much as we can, because
Mhm.
the threats are evolving, everything is evolving. So to keep up with them, we have to evolve and we have to read.
Right.
And secondly, in terms of how I perform intrusion analysis, so as I mentioned, when you're working as a SOC analyst, you don't have get an entire vision, and you don't even get an opportunity to complete from the analysis. From if you got an alert, you don't get to complete the analysis if it was something suspicious, because you get to transfer it to incident response or different kind of departments. But when I started working for DFI reports, so since we have the different artifacts available to us, so what I do now is create a timeline of the events which happened. So, for example, if I found initial access, for example, in the case of the report in the MSSQL server, we saw brute force attempts. Then, following the timeline, I try to see what all happened immediately or in the approximate after that, just to get an understanding of what is happening, what all has happened, and then create a timeline of events, and then go on from there, like then taking a deep dive into each of the events and the cycle. to get and then create a reports or create a better understanding of what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And even in my days as a SOC analyst, depending on the tools which I had. So for example, I got an alert for a alert, single alert, and I have the EDR tool. What I would do is check for the timeline, like 4 hours before the alert was triggered and after, just to get an understanding what happened, like why this particular alert was triggered. Because nothing happens in a vacuum. There's always something happening which led to that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very important to get an understanding of why that happened. And it helps in your analysis as well. And it helps you getting a better understanding of the landscape and the different things which are happening in the environment as well.
Great, great. So I had my interest with intrusion analysis as well, sometime quite a few years back. And there was always a discussion when I with the folks, my colleagues, and we'd always have a discussion around what is the best way to look at intrusion. Like you have an alert coming in, and we know there are different stages. If you go from a kill chain perspective, or if you go from a MITRE attack perspective, uh, if you are at a stage, say for example, execution, do you go back to find the initial attack vector, or do you look forward to see what was the action, or was there any were they able to go to the next stage of that attack? So to me, from my personal perspective, was always when I looked at a particular stage, I would, before going back, I would go forward to see if there was anything else that was say breached or not. Say for example, it's already late, we are at data movement. I would go ahead and see whether data was exfiltrated or not. I was wondering, what is your take on that as well? Because many people have different perspectives.
So in my opinion, it would depend on the urgency of the intrusion as well. For example, if you want to just scope the intrusion, like how far is the reach, for example, as you mentioned, lateral movement, how many machines have they moved to laterally? If you want to see, and it depends on our requirements as well. So for example, our first requirement is containment. We'll then focus on that particular area, like let's see what is happening, how far the intrusion has gone. And then once we have figured out, look, these were the infected machines and this is what has happened, then we can go back in time and see why this happened, what was the initial access vector, how we can do more about it, how we could have stopped it. And then those would come into the lessons learned and the different phases of the incident response. So I think it depends on each organization, what are their priorities, what are the requirements, and then you can go from there.
Cool. That's a good perspective to have. What what are the requirements that you're looking at? Nice. Cool.
Because when we are working with different people, like everybody's analysis style is also very different. Some like to perform analysis in different styles. So it depends on how the team functions and how you want to go forward from that.
Understood. Great. So let's just dive into your report for a bit. The report is on DFIR, and it's titled SQL Brute Force Leads to BlueSky Ransomware. This was published on December 4, 2023. And a couple of things, I found them very, very interesting, like the initial access in this particular incident or intrusion was more from a intrusion of a public-facing MSSQL server through a brute force attack on the server itself. So I was thinking if you could walk us through the attack chain, how
Uh,
what was
def
it?
Definitely. So, in the past, we have seen a couple of cases in which we saw brute force attempts on the MSSQL publicly available MSSQL server, but this was one of the first one where we actually saw deployment of ransomware, in this case, BlueSky ransomware. So that was the different thing. So in terms of the initial access, as you mentioned, we saw brute force attacks, and it was mainly for the SA admin account. And when we started this analysis, we were seeing a lot of failed password attempts for this particular account in the SQL Server logs. So that's how we first got to know that this was something brute force attempts were being going on. And so moving on from that was the initial access, then moving on to execution part, where we saw after the threat actors were able to successfully log in into the machine, they first enabled XP underscore CMD shell, which is just a kind of a utility which allows them to run command shell commands on the MSSQL server. So there we saw different activities being performed by them, different commands. Let's see. So they run some PowerShell base64 commands on that SQL server when they initially got the access. And then they can establish connection to various different C2 servers as well. So we saw two different C2 servers in this particular case. One was the Cobalt Strike, and then was a Tor 2 mine, which is a Monero mining C2 server. And the interesting part about this was, so this BlueSky ransomware was something new which I had encountered, and this was covered by, I think, Unit 44 from Palo Alto Networks, where they had covered in depth about the malware sample of the BlueSky ransomware, and they had seen some similarity with the Conti ransomware sample as well, which was the V3, so that they were able to find some similarities in that malware sample as well.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah.
So we have covered initial access, then was the execution. And for the persistence, something again which we see commonly is scheduled task and remote service creation that we see very commonly by most of the ransomware groups which we have covered over the past. And for the privilege escalation, again, we see Cobalt Strike was used and then used to inject into legitimate processes and then perform different post-exploitation activities from there on. So most of the activities, again, which we saw in this case as well, were very similar to what we have covered in the different ransomware groups as well. So their modus operandi or the TTPs typically remain the same, but in this case, the initial access was different because as we saw the brute force attempt on the MSSQL server, whereas we usually see a macro embedded document or similar Word document, which were then opened by the user, and then the infection chain starts.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I found interesting as well. Like initial access, usually TTPs are phishing, or you'll see exploitation of a vulnerability on Intel, but this one was a different way to get through. Interesting.
And also, as Ryan mentioned in one of your last few episodes as well, he went through different TTPs as well. So again, most of the TTPs which we see, as mentioned by him, remain the same. And I think he mentioned from the last 7 to 8 years, he has been seeing the similar TTPs being
Mm,
deployed by the threat actors. Yeah. So that's what we have also been seeing. And yeah, yes.
great. So for listeners, we are talking about Ryan Chaplin's episode 3. What do you need to know about ransomware? So if you guys have not seen that, do check that out on. I'll also post that link. But yeah, he's great. He's a great guy, and yeah, love.
Yes, so he has gone into a lot of details in terms of ransomware. So if you just want to go through that 1 hour video, like what is what, like initial access brokers, how you can hunt from them, like definitely watch his videos. And he also has, I think, a SANS course on
Oh
ransomware
yeah,
as well.
really good. Pretty good.
And I've contributed with him, like, so in 2021 I also presented at the SANS Ransomware Summit, so he was one of the moderators, so I got a chance to interact with him as well there.
Awesome. It's interesting because I presented in the SANS Ransomware Summit last year. It was on callback phishing, so it's good. Tell me more about what you presented. What was the talk on?
So basically what we did was in the year 2021, we just highlighted the major TTPs which we saw were being deployed by threat actors. So what we did was let's say initial access, these are the different TTPs or the behaviors being deployed by threat actors. Then all the other tactics, we mentioned all the different statistics which we had found in our cases across that year. And what we also did was we also provided some of the detections which can be used or the leverage to catch some of those activities. So one of the report which we blog which we published was all the Sigma rules and the different rules which can be used to create detections around the different TTPs which we have seen by the ransomware groups in that cases across that year.
Interesting. I'll check that out because I need to understand the TTPs from my work perspective as well. So interesting.
I can definitely share that link with you.
Awesome. And I'll also put that link in this so that listeners can pretty much go there as well. Great. Uh, so I also wanted to understand in this report, you also mentioned code injection. So one of the things that I wanted to understand from you was what is your process for detecting code injection into legit processes? How do you do that?
So for detecting of process injection, so this is again a very common technique which we see across being used extensively by threat actors across different like in terms of defense evasion. So they may be injecting into legitimate processes or even for privilege escalation. So for example, if there is a process with a higher privilege, they would inject it to that, then they will be able to perform malicious activity with the higher privileges. So depending on how we detect that, so we do rely on the telemetry, depending on what are the different artifacts which are available to us, depending on that machine or the compromised machine, we take it from there. So for example, let's say we have sysmon telemetry available to us. So there are different events which we can use to detect that. So for example, let me just open up my report and then I can walk you through that.
If you want to share, we can do that as well.
No, I can just talk through. So for example, in this particular report, we saw code injection into a legitimate process named winlogon.exe. So using sysmon event ID 8, which is the create remote thread, we were able to see some kind of injection happening in that particular process. And also what we can see is sometimes these processes, the process hierarchy can be a little suspicious as well. So for example, winlogon.exe, which we saw in this particular case, executing child processes such as cmd.exe, PowerShell.exe. So that's one way we can chain these commands or the processes to get an understanding like what's happening because they are usually suspicious. And there are a couple of great resources about this. So there's one sans poster which talks about the different processes in Windows system, and they have talked about the parent-child relationship as well. So for example, this should be the parent, this should be the child. If something else you are seeing, then that's suspicious. And there is also a great post by Red Canary in which they have mentioned the different ways you can go about detecting process injection using different telemetry. So for example, if you have sysmon, you can look for event ID 8. If you have EDR solution, you can create specific detections. Or for example, you have Windows system event logs, you can create those detections and try to find process injections as well. And I can share, I will share all of that links with you so that you can put it up and it would be helpful for the people who want to read more about it.
Amazing. That's really good. That would be really good. So, so you mentioned Sysmon. So that is something definitely we within if we want to detect intrusions or look for something suspicious, that's a really, really good log source for looking at it.
Yep, it's a very extensive log source. It provides a lot of information and it's really helpful.
Yeah, I found it more useful than Windows events log as well in certain cases when I want to hunt. So really good. Cool.
Yes. And so what we also do is when we are analyzing intrusions, uh, I just don't rely on a single event source. I try to correlate from different resources. As mentioned by Harlan Kavi, so he's a DFIR expert, so he has also mentioned about constellation. So what he says is when you see a particular TTP or an activity happening on a compromised host, there are always different log sources where it will be logged. So it's better to, rather than just relying on a single log source, try to combine different log sources to get a better understanding, because there's a chance one log source may not be fully correct, and it's not great to just rely on a particular log source as well.
Yeah, that is also the process we follow when we want to detect detection as well. When we want to create detection rules, correlation reduces the noise. Interesting. That's a good perspective to have. All right. So I was also interested in understanding about this ransomware, BlueSky ransomware. Are you seeing this a lot, this particular variant a lot in the intrusions that you're looking at, or is it a new one?
So it's something I encountered for the first time, and while we were going through that intrusion, I didn't find a lot of previous intrusions or this kind of ransomware group not very prevalent as of now. So there may be few cases where BlueSky ransomware was seen, but not very extensively in comparison to, for example, let's say Conti, which was seen massively across different organizations. But the important thing was, as mentioned by in one of the blog posts by Unit 44, who had gone through the analysis of the BlueSky ransomware, they did see some kind of similarity with two ransomware groups. One was the Conti, and other was the Babuk. So they did see some kind of similarity between the ransomware group, and it's also were using some kind of key generation algorithm, which was also which was similar with the different ransomware groups, as I mentioned, like Conti or Babuk. But it's not something I've seen extensively, a few cases here and there.
Okay. And also wondering, do you see in this particular case any kind of data exfiltration uh, in this particular intrusion or with any related to BlueSky ransomware?
So in this scenario, we didn't see any exfiltration on the basis of the telemetry or the artifacts which were available to us. But we did see encryption at the end with the BlueSky ransomware. But we didn't see any exfiltration, especially in this case.
Okay. Interesting. And what was also wanted to understand the dwell time between the initial access and then finally deployment of the ransomware. Was it like a couple of days or weeks, or was it hours?
So it was pretty quick. So when the threat actors are able to get initial access using the brute force attempts on the SQL server, within a couple of hours we were able to see encryption across the environment. So it was pretty quick in terms of from when they got the initial access to their impact as well. So it was pretty quick.
Amazing. That's because initially I remember, I think the dwell time in in ransomware attacks was quite from say a couple of weeks, and it started getting it lower and lower, and now into hours. That is really a
So yes, so before we joining the call, I saw actually Microsoft has released their intelligence report for 2023, and also they have mentioned the dwell time going further down. So I don't remember the exact figure what they mentioned, but I could see that mentioned that the dwell times have also decreased.
yeah. That's interesting because usually a threat actor would want to stay in the environment, discover stuff, but in now the case is different. You want to just encrypt and install ransomware before.
Definitely. And also what we have seen, as Ryan has also mentioned, in the intrusions we have covered as well, the TTPs have pretty much remained the same, and with the detections available in public,
Mm,
some of these things are pretty easy to catch as well.
you see,
So they don't have really gone for they haven't made an effort to actually hide in the environment. They're just using the techniques which are efficient and get the work done. So that's what we have seen as well.
that makes sense. Yeah, with more and more detection and hunting and all that, you don't want to linger a lot if you are the attacker. That
And
makes
also if it works, what they have, why change it? If it works, then why still change it?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Great, great. Yatin, it was really good talking to you, and understanding how DFIR operates in the best practices for intrusion analysis. I really had a very good time talking to you, and hopefully we'll have more of these in the future as well. And I'm sure our listeners would love this as well.
Thank you so much, Arun, for having me, and it was a pleasure talking to you. And it's great, like, got to share my knowledge with everyone and a journey so that people get to know and they can take that information and build their own journey from there as well. So thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here.